Kethra Station floated in the dark space between three star systems that no government wanted to claim. And this made it the perfect place for creatures who did not want to be found by any government at all. The station was old and ugly, and built from the scrapped hulls of 100 dead ships. And it stretched out into the void like a metal tumor growing on the edge of civilized space. Here the galaxy's most dangerous species came to trade and hunt and kill. And the only law was the law of predators, which meant that the strong took what they wanted and the weak either ran or died. Vorax hunters stalked the corridors on 6 blade-tipped legs, their compound eyes always watching for weakness. Their serrated limbs folded against their armored bodies like weapons waiting to be. Drawn Skethal assassins moved through the shadows like living smoke, their long tongues tasting the air for the chemical signatures of fear and pain that told them when prey was ready to be taken. Thornback mercenaries stood in groups at every junction, their bodies covered in bone spurs and thick muscle, bred across 1,000 generations for nothing but war and killing. And in the deepest parts of the station, where the lights flickered and the air tasted like old blood, the Drexar waited in their darkness. Psychic parasites who fed on terror and could reach into a mind and fill it with nightmares until the victim begged for death. This was Kethra Station, and every creature here was a predator of some kind. And they all understood each other in the way that hunters understand hunters. When the small cargo ship requested permission to dock, the station's computer flagged it as unimportant and sent the request to the harbor master without any special warnings. Krell was a Vorax who had survived 40 years on Kethra Station, which meant he was smarter and more cautious and more brutal than most of his kind. And the scars that covered his exoskeleton told the story of every fight he had won and every enemy he had killed. He looked at the docking request and saw nothing interesting, one life sign on the ship, which meant a solo traveler, which usually meant either a fool or someone too poor to afford crew. The ship was human-made, old and patched and barely holding together. The kind of vessel that smugglers used when they could not afford anything better. The weapon's signature was minimal, just a standard sidearm registered to the pilot. Nothing that would threaten even the weakest hunter on the station. Krell approved the docking request and went back to his other work, because a single human was not worth his attention. He knew about humans, of course, because everyone in the galaxy knew about humans by now. They came from a world called Earth, which was technically classified as a death world because of its dangerous predators and unstable climate and 1,000 different ways it could kill its inhabitants. Humans were persistent predators, which meant they did not chase down their prey with speed or strength, but simply followed it until it collapsed from exhaustion. And this was interesting from a biological perspective, but not particularly impressive when compared to the natural weapons of species like the Vorax or the Thornbacks. Individually, humans were soft and slow and fragile, easy to kill if you caught them alone. And Krell had seen several humans come through Kethra Station over the years, and most of them had not left alive. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Commander Elena Vasquez stepped onto Kethra Station for the first time. She was not tall, and she was not physically impressive, and she wore simple clothes that looked like they had seen too many years of hard use. Her hair was dark and cut short and practical, and her face was the kind of face that would not stand out in any crowd, neither beautiful nor ugly, just ordinary in every way. She carried no visible weapons except for the sidearm on her hip, and she had no escort and no backup and no apparent plan for how she would survive in a place where everything wanted to kill her. The Vorax dock workers noticed her immediately, because noticing potential prey was what they did, and several of them shifted their weight in the way that meant they were considering whether this small, soft creature was worth hunting. Elena did not seem to notice them at all. She walked forward into the station with a steady, pace that did not speed up and did not slow down. And she did not look around nervously the way prey animals looked around when they knew they were being watched. A thornback mercenary blocked the main corridor. 8 feet of bone and muscle and barely contained violence. And he looked down at the human woman with the expression that predators used when they wanted to establish dominance. Elena kept walking. She did not step aside, and she did not lower her eyes, and she did not show any of the submission signals that the thornback expected from a creature so much smaller and weaker than himself. She just kept walking forward at exactly the same pace, as if the massive warrior in front of her was not there at all, as if he was nothing more than empty air. The thornback felt something strange in that moment, something his instincts recognized even though his conscious mind could not name it. He stepped aside. He did not know why he stepped aside, and when he thought about it later, he would feel angry and confused and ashamed. But in that moment, his body simply moved out of the human's path without waiting for his brain to give permission. Elena walked past him without a word and without a glance and disappeared into the crowded corridors of Kethris Station. The thornback stood there for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to understand why every instinct in his body had told him to move, told him that standing in front of that small soft human was somehow more dangerous than standing in front of a charging warship. He could not find an answer that made sense, but deep in the oldest part of his brain, in the place where 1,000 generations of survival instincts lived and whispered, something had recognized the human woman for what she truly was. Something had looked into her eyes and seen not prey, not predator, but something else entirely, something that made even nightmares want to run away. Scathol matriarch Yesin had killed 47 sentient beings across 6 different star systems, and she remembered every single one of them with perfect clarity, because that was how the Scathol mind worked. Each kill was a memory that she could taste and smell and feel whenever she wanted. And she collected these memories the way some species collected precious metals or beautiful art. The Scathol were hunters who had evolved on a world of eternal twilight, where vision was useless and sound was unreliable. And so they had developed chemoreceptors so sensitive that they could taste emotions in the air. From 100 meters away, Yesin could detect the exact mixture of hormones that a creature released when it was afraid. And she could tell the difference between the fear of death and the fear of pain and the fear of the unknown. She could taste the chemical signature of anger and the signature of despair and the signature of that sweet moment when prey finally gave up hope and accepted that it was going to die. In all her years of hunting, she had never encountered a creature whose emotional states she could not read. And this made her one of the most dangerous assassins in the galaxy, because no one could hide from her. No one could lie to her. No one could pretend to be brave when she could literally taste their terror on her tongue. The human woman was sitting alone at a table in the station's central cantina, drinking something that smelled like industrial solvent mixed with plant matter, which Yesin understood was a common human beverage called coffee. Yesin watched her from across the room for several minutes, tasting the air and trying to understand what she was sensing. The human showed no fear, which was unusual but not impossible, because some species simply lacked the brain chemistry that produced fear responses. The human showed no anger, which was also unusual for a creature surrounded by predators who would happily kill her for entertainment. The human showed no stress, no anxiety, no tension, none of the chemical signatures that Yesin associated with beings who were in dangerous situations. This was interesting enough to make Yesin curious, and curiosity was what drove her hunting instincts. So she rose from her seat and moved across the cantina toward the human's table. Several other predators watched her approach, because everyone knew who Yesin was, and everyone wanted to see what would happen when she encountered this strange soft creature who had walked through the station like she owned it. Yesin stopped beside the human's table and let her tongue extend fully into the air, tasting deeply, trying to read every chemical signal the creature was producing, and then she froze. There was no fear in the human. That much was true, but there was something else. Something that Yesin's conscious mind could not identify, but her instincts recognized immediately. It was an old signature, ancient and primal. Something that existed in the deepest genetic memories of every species that had ever been prey. It was the signature of a creature that had not killed once or twice in self-defense. Not killed in the heat of anger or the desperation of survival, but killed so many times and so completely that the act had become as natural and unremarkable as breathing or sleeping or eating. Yesin had tasted killers before, many times, and she knew the chemical signatures they produced. The subtle traces of aggression and dominance and remembered violence that marked them as dangerous. This human had none of those signatures. There was no aggression in her scent, no dominance, no enjoyment of violence, no trauma or guilt, or any of the emotional residue that killing usually left behind. There was only a vast and terrible calm, like the surface of a deep ocean that hid unknowable depths beneath. The human looked up from her coffee and met Yesin's eyes, and she smiled. It was a small smile that did not show any teeth and did not reach her eyes. And it was the most terrifying thing Yesin had ever seen in her life. In that moment, Yesin understood what her senses were telling her. This creature was not prey, and she was not a predator in the way that Yesin understood predators. She was something else entirely. Something that existed beyond the simple categories of hunter and hunted. She was what happened when a species spent millions of years learning to kill everything that threatened it. When survival became so ingrained that violence was no longer emotional, but simply mechanical. When death became a tool to be used without passion or hesitation or regret. Yesin had spent her entire life as one of the galaxy's most feared killers. And she knew with sudden and absolute certainty that she was looking at something that sat above her on the food chain. The human took another sip of her coffee and said nothing, because she did not need to say anything, because they both knew that Yesin had already decided to walk away, and Yesin did walk away, backing up slowly and carefully, never turning her back on the human. Her chemoreceptors still tasting that terrible calm that spoke of 1,000 deaths delivered without a single wasted emotion. She returned to her own corner of the HFY Story cantina and began sending messages through her network. Warnings to every skethol on the station. Warnings that spread within hours to every skethol. In the sector, the messages were simple and urgent, and they all said the same thing. There is a human on Kethra Station, and she is not prey. Do not approach her. Do not threaten her. Do not make her notice you. She is something old and something dangerous and something that we do not want to hunt. The other predators in the cantina watched Yesin's retreat with confusion and concern, because they had never seen the feared matriarch back away from anything before. And one by one, they began to approach the human themselves, driven by curiosity and pride, and the need to prove that they were not afraid of anything. And one by one, they encountered the same thing that Yesin had encountered. They looked into those calm, steady eyes, and they felt their instincts screaming warnings that their conscious minds could not understand. They saw that small, closed-lipped smile, and they felt something ancient in their blood recognize a truth that civilization had taught them to forget. There were predators in the galaxy, countless species that had evolved to hunt and kill and dominate. And then there were the things that hunted the predators. The human finished her coffee and ordered another one, completely unaware that she had just become the most talked about creature on Kethra Station. Or perhaps simply not caring. She had a job to do, and she was patient. And she would wait as long as she needed to wait. That was what humans did. They waited and they watched, and they followed their prey to the ends of the universe if necessary, because giving up was not something that humans knew how to do. Within 12 hours of the humans' arrival, stories about her had spread to every corner of Kethra Station, passed from predator to predator in whispers and encrypted messages and nervous glances across crowded rooms. The stories grew with each telling, as stories always do. But unlike most rumors, these stories were not exaggerations of a small truth, but rather understatements of a larger one. A pack of young Varax hunters had cornered the human in a maintenance corridor near the lower decks, because young Varax were always eager to prove themselves, and they did not yet have the experience to recognize when they had made a terrible mistake. There were 6 of them, each one armed with the natural blades that grew from their forelimbs, each one convinced that a single soft human would be easy prey. They surrounded her in the standard hunting formation, cutting off all escape routes, clicking their mandibles in the threat display that told prey it was time to submit or die. The human stopped walking and turned to face the pack leader, and she did not raise her hands, and she did not reach for her weapon, and she did not show any sign of fear or anger, or even mild concern. She just looked at them with those steady, dark eyes and said 5 words in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly flat. "I am not here for you." The pack leader laughed, because he was young and stupid, and he did not understand what he was dealing with. And he said that the human did not get to decide who was prey on Kethra Station. He took 1 step toward her, raising his blade arms in preparation for the first strike, and then he was on the ground. No one saw exactly what happened, not even the other Varax, because it happened so fast that their compound eyes could not track it. One moment the pack leader was standing and threatening and confident, and the next moment the human had moved, and he was screaming on the floor with his primary hunting limb bent backward at an angle that limbs were not supposed to bend. She had not used a weapon, and she had not made a sound, and she had not even changed her expression. 3 movements, the witnesses would later say. Just 3 movements so fast and so precise that they seemed more like mathematics than violence. The human looked at the rest of the pack and waited. And the rest of the pack discovered that their legs would not obey the commands their brains were sending, that some deep animal instinct had seized control of their bodies and was refusing to let them attack. She walked away without another word, stepping over the screaming pack leader as if he was nothing more than a piece of debris on the corridor floor. The pack leader survived, but he would never hunt again. And the story of what had happened spread through the Varax community like fire through dry grass. The Thornback mercenaries heard the story and decided they needed more information. So they used their military contacts to access the human ship computer and pull her records. What they found made their commander drink himself unconscious in the cantina that night. The human's name was Elena Vasquez, and she was not a cargo hauler or a smuggler or any of the other harmless things her cover story claimed. She was a peacekeeper, which was the name humanity had chosen for its hunter-killers, the special operatives who were sent to find targets that had fled beyond the reach of normal law enforcement. The records showed that she had been doing this job for over 20 years, which was a very long time for someone in such a dangerous profession to survive. The records showed that she had tracked targets across dozens of star systems, through war zones and lawless regions and places where even the bravest soldiers feared to go. And the records showed that her confirmed kill count was listed as classified beyond their clearance level, which meant that the number was so high that even military intelligence did not want it widely known. The Thornback commander was not a coward, and he had fought in 3 interstellar wars. But he looked at those records and felt something cold settle into his stomach. He knew what it meant when a kill count was classified. It meant that the number would frighten people if they knew it. It meant that this small, quiet human had ended more lives than most armies. But the most disturbing discovery came from the Drexar. Because the Drexar were the true rulers of Kethra Station, and they did not like mysteries in their domain. The Drexar were psychic parasites who fed on fear. And they had evolved on a world where the most nutritious prey were the creatures that could feel the deepest terror. They could reach into a mind and find its worst fears and make those fears real, filling their victim's consciousness with nightmares, so vivid and so terrible that strong warriors had been known to claw out their own eyes to escape the visions. The eldest Drexar on the station was called Morvith, and he had lived for 300 years and fed on the terror of thousands of beings. And he decided that he would be the one to break this strange human who had unsettled so many predators. He found her in a quiet corridor on the mid-levels and reached out with his mind to touch hers, to find her fears and drag them into the light, to show her nightmares that would reduce her to a screaming wreck. And the moment he touched her mind, he screamed. The other Drexar found him curled in a corner of the corridor, trembling and whimpering, his psychic abilities completely burnt out from the backlash of what he had experienced. He would not say what he had seen in the human's memories. He would not describe the things that lived in her mind, the experiences that had shaped her into what she was. He only said one thing over and over, in a voice that shook with genuine terror. She has walked through places worse than any nightmare I could create. The darkest visions I could show her are gentle compared to what she has already survived. She has seen hell, and she walked out the other side unchanged. Do not touch her mind. Do not try to frighten her. There is nothing we can show her that she has not already seen and conquered. The Drexar had ruled Kethra Station through fear for over a century. And now, for the first time, they themselves knew what it felt like to be afraid, and they did not like the feeling at all. Commander Elena Vasquez had not come to Kethra Station to frighten anyone. She had not come to prove that humans were dangerous or to establish dominance over the predator species that called this place home. She had come for one reason, and one reason only. And that reason was a man named Solomon Cray. Solomon Cray was human, born on Earth in a small city called Detroit. And he had discovered early in life that he had no conscience and no empathy and no capacity to see other beings as anything more than resources to be exploited. He had started his career as a small-time criminal on Earth, moved up to organized crime in the colonies, and eventually found his true calling in the darkest trade the galaxy had to offer. Solomon Cray sold people. He captured humans from isolated colonies and frontier settlements, places where law enforcement was weak and communications were poor. And he sold them to alien species who wanted human slaves or human specimens or human prey for their hunting games. 8 months ago, he had raided a small farming colony called New Providence and taken 37 people, men and women and children, families who had been trying to build a new life on the edge of explored space. He had sold them to a Vorax breeding clan who wanted human stock to raise as prey animals for their young hunters to practice on. When the colonial authorities discovered what had happened, they sent a request to Earth for help. And Earth had sent Elena Vasquez. She had been tracking Cray across 12 star systems, always one step behind, following the trail of witnesses and records and rumors that he left in his wake. The trail had led her here, to Kethra Station, where Cray had come to collect payment for his latest delivery and perhaps find new merchandise to sell. Elena did not care about the other predators on the station. She did not care that they were afraid of her or that they were spreading stories about her or that the Drexar had declared her mind too dangerous to touch. She only cared about finding Solomon Cray and completing her mission. But the other predators did not know this, and their ignorance was making them very nervous. On the second day after her arrival, ships began leaving Kethra Station, The first to go were the Skethal, because Matriarch Yesen had given the order, and the Skethal always followed the orders of their matriarchs. Then the younger Varax began to leave. The ones who had heard the story of the hunting pack and decided they did not want to risk a similar fate. The Thornback mercenaries held a meeting in their barracks and voted to relocate their operations to a different station, at least until this strange human was gone, and the Drexar, who had never fled from anything in 300 years of domination, quietly packed their belongings and slipped away on private vessels without telling anyone they were leaving. By the third day, the population of Kethra Station had dropped by more than half. Hunting contracts were abandoned in the middle of negotiations. Territorial disputes that had lasted for years were suddenly forgotten. Species that had been at war for generations walked past each other in the corridors without a single threat or challenge, because they were all too focused on getting to the docking bays and getting away. The harbor master Krull watched the exodus from his control center with growing concern. He had survived 4 decades on Kethra Station by understanding the balance of power and knowing when that balance was about to shift. He had never seen anything like this. He had never seen every predator species on the station unified in a single purpose. He had never seen them all afraid of the same thing. Finally, on the evening of the third day, Krell decided that he needed to know what was happening, and the only way to find out was to ask the human directly. He found her in the cantina, sitting at the same table she had occupied since her arrival, reviewing data on a small handheld screen. She did not look up when he approached, but she said, "Sit down," in a voice that was polite, but left no room for argument. Krell sat down, moving carefully, keeping his blade arms folded tight against his body in the universal posture of non-aggression. "I am Krell," he said. "I am the harbor master of this station." "I know who you are," the human replied, still looking at her screen. "May I ask what brings you to Kethra Station?" "Commander Vasquez." She looked up at him then, and Krell felt his survival instincts flare in warning. But he forced himself to stay still and maintain eye contact. "I am looking for a human named Solomon Cray," she said. "He arrived here 3 days ago to collect payment for a cargo of human slaves he sold to a Varax breeding clan. 37 colonists of a settlement called New Providence." Krell processed this information quickly, because a harbor master needed to know everyone who came and went from his station. "I know of this man," he said carefully. "He is in the upper residential section, Suite 47. He has hired bodyguards from several species." The human nodded and returned her attention to her screen. "Thank you for the information," she said. "Tell your remaining residents to stay away from that section tonight. I will be leaving the station tomorrow." Krell stood up slowly, understanding that he had been dismissed. "May I ask one more question?" "Commander, you may ask. Why are they all afraid of you? Every predator on this station is fleeing from you, but you have done nothing to threaten them. You have barely even spoken to most of them. What is it about you that frightens them so much?" The human looked up at him again, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Something that might have been sadness, or might have been pity, or might have been something else entirely. "They are not afraid of me," she said. "They are afraid of what I represent. They have spent their lives being the most dangerous things in every room they enter. And now they have encountered something that makes them feel like prey. Their instincts recognize me as something outside their experience, something that does not follow the rules they understand. And that unknown frightens them more than any specific threat could." She paused and took a sip of her coffee. "Humans are persistence predators. Krell, we evolved by chasing things until they collapse from exhaustion. Our ancestors hunted creatures 10 times their size across entire continents, running them down over days or weeks until the prey simply could not run anymore. That is what makes the other predators afraid. They look at me and they see something that will never stop following them. Never stop watching them. Never stop waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They see patience and determination that has no end. And that terrifies them in a way that claws and teeth and weapons never could. Krell nodded slowly. Understanding at last, "I will clear the upper residential section," he said. "And I will tell the remaining residents to stay in their quarters until you are gone." "Thank you," said Commander Vasquez. "That would be appreciated." Krell walked away with the distinct feeling that he had just had the most dangerous conversation of his life, and he had survived it only because the human had chosen to let him survive. Solomon Cray had heard all the stories about the human woman who had emptied Kethra Station, and he had dismissed every single one of them as superstitious nonsense. He was a practical man who believed only in things he could see and touch and spend, and he had no patience for tales of mysterious predators who frightened other predators just by existing. He had survived in the darkest corners of the galaxy for over 30 years by being smart and ruthless and always having enough bodyguards to handle any threat. Right now he had plenty of bodyguards. 2 Thornback mercenaries stood by the door of his suite, each one a veteran of dozens of battles, each one armed with enough firepower to destroy a small army. 3 Varax hunters waited in the outer room, their blade arms extended and ready, their compound eyes watching every shadow for movement, and in the corner sat a Drexar mindbreaker named Sheth, young and arrogant and eager to prove himself by destroying the mind of this human who had supposedly frightened his elders into fleeing. Solomon felt completely safe, surrounded by so much muscle and weaponry, and he spent the evening counting the credits he had received for selling those colonists as the Varax breeding clan. 37 humans sold at premium prices, enough money to keep him comfortable for years. And he was already planning his next raid on another isolated settlement. The first sign that something was wrong came when one of the Thornback mercenaries looked at the door, looked at Solomon, and then simply walked out without saying a word. Solomon shouted after him, but the mercenary did not stop and did not look back. And a few seconds later, Solomon heard the sound of his heavy footsteps disappearing down the corridor. The second Thornback followed a minute later, pausing only long enough to say, "This is not what I was paid for," before abandoning his post. Solomon turned to the Varax hunters and demanded to know what was happening. And the lead hunter replied that he could smell something approaching, something that made every instinct in his body scream warnings he could not ignore. "What do you smell?" Solomon demanded. The Varax hunter struggled to find words that could describe what his senses were telling him. "She smells like nothing," he finally said. "No fear, no anger, no excitement, no emotion at all. She smells like death itself, cold and patient and absolutely certain." "Then go kill her," Solomon shouted. "That is what I am paying you for." The Varax hunters looked at each other, and something passed between them, some communication that Solomon could not understand. And then all 3 of them turned and walked toward the back exit of the suite. "Where are you going?" Solomon screamed at them. "We are hunters," the lead Varax said without turning around. "We hunt prey. We do not hunt things that hunt us." And then they were gone, leaving Solomon alone with only the Drexar mindbreaker for protection. Sheth rose from his corner, his black eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Do not worry," he said. "I will destroy her mind before she reaches this room." My elders were fools to flee from a mere human. He extended his psychic senses into the corridor outside, searching for the human's consciousness, preparing to fill it with nightmares that would leave her a broken shell. He touched her mind for less than 1 second. Then he collapsed to the floor, whimpering and trembling, his psychic abilities completely overwhelmed by what he had found inside her memories. "What did you see?" Solomon demanded, his voice rising with panic now that his last line of defense had fallen. Chef looked up at him with eyes that had seen something they could never unsee. She has killed thousands, he whispered. Thousands of beings across dozens of worlds. And each death is a crystal clear memory that she carries without weight or burden. She has walked through horrors that would destroy any mind, and she is completely undamaged by them. I tried to show her fear, and she showed me what she has already survived. And there is nothing in my imagination that can compare to her reality. He crawled toward the back exit, desperate to escape. She is not coming here to fight you, he said as he fled. She is coming here to complete a task. And nothing will stop her, and nothing will slow her. And when she is finished, you will be dead, and she will walk away unchanged. That is what she is, a force of nature wearing human skin. And then Sheth was gone. And Solomon Cray was alone. He grabbed a weapon from the table and pointed it at the door with shaking hands, telling himself that he had survived worse situations than this, telling himself that one human woman could not possibly be as dangerous as everyone seemed to believe. The door opened without a sound. Commander Elena Vasquez stepped into the room, and she was exactly as unremarkable as everyone had described. A woman of average height and average build with a face that would disappear in any crowd. She was not carrying a weapon, and she was not moving with any particular urgency, and she did not seem to notice or care that Solomon was pointing a gun directly at her chest. She just walked forward with that steady, unhurried pace that had unnerved every predator on Kethra Station. Solomon Cray, she said, and her voice was calm and flat and completely empty of any emotion. You raided a colony called New Providence 8 months ago. You took 37 people and sold them to a Varax breeding clan. Stay back, Solomon shouted, waving his weapon. I will shoot you. I swear I will. 17 of those colonists survived, she continued as if he had not spoken. I extracted them from the Varax facility 2 weeks ago. They are safe now. They are going home to their families. What remains is you. What are you? Solomon asked. And he hated the fear he could hear in his own voice. She stopped walking and looked at him with those steady dark eyes. And she smiled that small cold smile that every predator on the station had learned to fear. I am human, she said simply. We are persistence predators. We do not stop, we do not tire, we do not give up. Our ancestors chased prey across entire continents until it collapsed, and we have never forgotten how to do that. When you took those colonists, you did not just commit a crime. You hurt our people, and when you hurt our people, we follow you to the edge of the universe. Solomon fired his weapon, once, twice, 3 times, but his hands were shaking so badly that every shot missed by a wide margin. Elena did not flinch, and did not duck, and did not even blink. She just kept walking forward. I tracked you for 8 months. Across 12 star systems, she said. I followed every lead and every rumor and every trail of evidence you left behind. I never lost hope, and I never gave up, and I never stopped believing that I would find you eventually. Because that is what humans do. We pursue, we persist, we endure. And in the end, we always catch our prey. She was standing directly in front of him now, close enough to touch. And Solomon realized with absolute clarity that he was going to die. He looked into her eyes and saw nothing there. No anger and no hatred and no satisfaction. Just the cold, patient certainty of a being who had done this 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 times again. Please, he whispered. The colonists you sold begged too, she replied. It did not help them. The shot was quick and clean and professional, Commander. Elena Vasquez holstered her weapon and walked out of the suite without looking back. The next morning she departed Kethris Station as quietly as she had arrived. Her mission complete, her target eliminated. Another job finished. It would take weeks for the predators to return, months for normal operations to resume, and the story would spread across the galaxy. Passed from species to species, a warning and a lesson that the universe's nightmares would never forget humans. We're not the biggest or the fastest or the strongest, but they had spent millions of years becoming the one thing that every predator feared, an apex predator that hunted other apex predators, and even nightmares knew when they were outmatched.